Happy Father's Day to all of you today. I'm excited about today's Father's Day special. It is entitled Justice from the Voices of Fathers. I got some amazing fathers on deck. We're going to have some real man cave type Father's Day dialogue that's family friendly, community friendly for male, female, everybody. Join us as I introduce you to some key fathers on this Father's Day special, Justice from the Voices of Fathers. Happy Father's Day to all of the amazing men around the nation, around the globe, Kenya, Africa, the Free Indeed churches there. Happy Father's Day. Happy Father's Day from Southside Houston to Third Ward to Acres Homes to North Side to A-Leaf, all over the city, all over the country, to our friends in California, brothers and sisters there, greetings, all the way to the East Coast of New York. Happy Father's Day. Johnny Gentry here, Free Indeed Church. I'm excited, not just about fathers, but about the season that we're in our nation. There's a scripture in Malachi that says, in the last days, I'll turn the hearts of the fathers back to the children and the hearts of the children back to the fathers. And in a time of unrest, brokenness, anger, rage, an opportunity for change in our nation, a movement that's happening now, Black lives experiencing just unjust racial bias profile, all the things that are happening in our nation. Now is the time for the body of Christ, for those of us who are believers, to really rise up and hear the voice of God concerning what is he saying to fathers and the role that fathers play in the Black family, in the Black community, in our cities and in our nations as it relates to healing. I've got two amazing fathers on with us today who you're going to hear from. Dr. Cofield, Captain Freeman, welcome. We're honored to have with us the Dr. D.Z. Cofield, senior pastor of the Good Hope Missionary Baptist Church, mega church in Third Ward, where George Floyd served in ministry. Dr. D.Z. Cofield has amazing reach nationwide. His influence and leadership is pronounced, and it precedes him in this city. He was the president of the Houston branch NAACP for a season and has done amazing work through his church with schools, education, issues of justice, and his influence throughout the city. Welcome, D.Z. Cofield.
Yeah, so I'm D.Z. Cofield, for those of you who don't know me, which is probably most of you. I'm a senior pastor at the Good Hope Missionary Baptist Church in Houston, Texas. I've been serving there now 26 years. I'm from New York originally, born in Brooklyn, New York, and then grew up between Brooklyn and the Lower East Side of Manhattan in the Jacob Riis housing projects. Come from a family of law enforcement. My dad was a police officer, and then later on was converted and became a preacher of the gospel. And so that was my introduction to Christianity in a very real way. I didn't grow up going to church. As a matter of fact, I didn't give my life to the Lord until I was a senior in high school. And my dad's philosophy was, once he got saved, he really didn't want to push it on us. The only requirement was, if you lived under the roof, you were going to go to church. So, Johnny, I remember several times going to parties and, kind of staggering in and then just throwing some water on my face and wearing my party clothes to church. But because that was the rule, but gave my life to the Lord. And, it's been a tremendous journey. Had a variety of experiences, including in education, teaching on the secondary level, as well as post-secondary and graduate level, and have been an advocate and activist in the area of education, and also in the area of criminal justice reform. I was a juvenile probation officer.
Wow.
And what was interesting for me, having worked both in the courts as well as in the field and intake, was to sit in meetings and hear people strategize on how to get children to fail. And that was really surprising to me, because I'm thinking we're all on the same team and we want to help kids. And in actuality, I found out nothing was further from the truth. And so taking that experience, taking that work in juvenile justice, and my love for the community, that's basically undergirded the ministry that we've been involved in at the Good Hope Church.
Yeah, awesome. Well, you're being very modest, and anyone who knows Houston knows that Dr. DZ Cofield is an icon in the city, not just a pastor, but mega church pastor, has built that vision, has transformed Third Ward, schools, many other things that you've mentioned.
Your voice and your kind of leadership is, I believe, answer to where we need to go, and we're gonna have a chance to touch on that and for you to speak on that in a moment. Where do we need to go? But before that, we got a lot of ground to cover. So I want to introduce my brother, my friend, Captain Greg Freeman, retired Houston Police Department captain, 30 years of service to this community, amazing father. He is the father of 2 black sons. But while he was captain here in Northeast Houston, he stopped 40 years of bad policing, police brutality, and community complaints. He unified pastors in Northeast, community stakeholders, brought them together to address issues of policing. And we have had a season of effective law enforcement in Northeast with minimal police shootings, minimal complaints, and he's an amazing leader and friend to Northeast Houston and to HPD. Welcome, Captain Greg Freeman.
Now, y'all, my T-shirt says "Black Fathers Matter." And you might be looking at my white brother saying, "Hold on, he ain't no black father." But y'all, please don't pass judgment, because the guy I'm getting ready to introduce is an amazing father. He's the father, and I'll start off with this. He's the father of black sons. Am I right? And he's a retired HPD captain, and he retired in the Northeast region where our church serves. And I'm proud to say that this is a leader in the black community in the city who not just led with low to no incidences in Northeast Houston with police shootings and police brutality complaints, all that kind of stuff. But this guy brought pastors together, dialogue with pastors, dialogue with community stakeholders about policing, about issues of justice and injustice, and had an open door as a police captain for the community, for anybody who needed to voice complaints or offer suggestions or partner with the police department in making Northeast Houston better. And as I said, he's the father of black sons. So I want you all to welcome Captain Greg Freeman. And if you would just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what you're doing in this season.
Pastor, before I start, can you take your hat off just for a second, just for the audience? The commonality that we three have here, I just want everyone. We are bald and beautiful, brother.
That's right. That's right.
All right. So listen, I feel very honored to be invited to this forum, Johnny, and I appreciate you and Pastor Cofield taking a stand. And I know there are many other pastors that have done this, and I think we could use a lot more of this in this nation from men that have stepped up, being able to separate fact from fiction for this nation right now. It definitely needs it. And I thank you personally, from me to you, and we've known each other for a long time, for doing this.
Yeah.
I feel very honored to be here, gentlemen. Feel very conflicted because I have to sit on the sidelines now in a way because I'm retired. But I spent 34 years with the Houston Police Department. I joined at the age of 19.
Wow.
I spent 6 years in the Marine Corps Reserves right after high school. So I was a Marine reservist and a policeman at the same time. I came on the department at a very transitional time of our agency. Lee P. Brown was our police chief, Dr. Cofield, you remember him. And we were going through a generational change. So I got to see a little bit of the old school and a lot of the new generational tactics of policing. Rose up through the ranks to the rank of captain. I retired as a police captain. I was a captain for 13 years. I'm a graduate of the FBI National Academy. I got really to travel the world in my profession. And I teach now as an adjunct professor for the last couple of years at Sam Houston State University and also the University of Houston downtown. So my new calling in life, it's a continuation of being able to prepare and train the next generation of criminal justice practitioners. And I still have a love of the police department. We've gone through a lot of changes. And I've had a lot of hurt, I'll be honest with you. I mean, you and I have talked a lot over these last couple of weeks, and I've lost sleep over the last several weeks to what I've seen happening in this nation. And I'm just glad to be a part of this to where we can kind of help put some, not just a Band-Aid on it, but heal it. Yeah. And I think that's what our nation needs more of right now. So I feel very honored to be here. And again, Dr. Cofield, your leadership is without question. Thank you again for allowing me to be a part of this journey.
Man, well, we appreciate you. And I think that law enforcement professionals are who come through your class is going to get it real.
Well, they get it real.
Get it real. Yeah. All right. Well, let's just, if you don't mind, Dr. Cofield, just kind of talk about the beginning of fathering for you. Where were you? What was going on with you? And how did, I put it like this, where were you in life and how did fathering interface with your call to build ministry?
Yeah, so I think, Johnny, I would best describe my fathering early on as, without question, trial and error. I look back now and I'm like, man, I literally have asked, especially my two older children, for forgiveness. I've prayed and asked God to heal and mend any challenges and where I was off base, in part because as an early father, I was a young father. My first child was born, I was 22. And then my wife and we had our second child right after that. And, you know, I tend to be an optimistic person. And so I'd love putting a positive spin on it. You know, I get a chance to grow up with my children and, you know, activities and things like that. But really nothing was further from the truth, man. I was hustling, just trying to make sure that I kept a roof over their heads. My mom and dad split up when I was in college. And so I ended up having to drop out of school. More emotional, the reasoning than financial. Yeah. And then got married and started having kids and all of those things, man. And just was really struggling. My dad was the kind of dad who did better than his dad did, but did not provide the emotional support that I probably would have needed. And so I can look back and say, I did better than my dad did because I was there more. But man, I was hustling. And so there were pieces of fatherhood that I didn't have any grasp of. I didn't have any men in my life that I could really talk to. The biggest influence on my life was my grandfather. And my maternal grandfather, man, I love that dude. And, you know, he passed away a month after my first child was born. And so I remember him, you know, we gave him a picture of her, but he never got a chance to really interact with her or the rest of my children. Yeah. And so I didn't have anybody to call, you know, because my dad and I at that point were estranged. And so I was just trying to make it, you know, and those kids, you know, they have this nasty habit of wanting to eat every day, you know. So, you know, I'm just, man, I'm trying. I mean, I can remember literally I started preaching. So I was in ministry, but I wasn't pastoring. I wasn't established or anything. And I was just in this crazy place. And I just remember, you know, taking odd jobs, you know, and literally taking checks and buying a case of milk, you know, buying a case of Pampers, you know, that was it, you know, And everything that I was doing, I looked at in terms of, okay, how many diapers can I get? Okay, how many Pampers, how much milk can I get? And that was basically, how my life was. And I really didn't get to the place emotionally where I really understood the importance of a father and had the time and stability to be a dad until my youngest son came. He's about 4 years younger, but it was probably 10 years after that. I mean, when I finally felt like I was stable, I was kind of secure, and I was like, all right, I'm ready to be a dad. And it was like, man, my kids are like all grown and or thought they were grown, right? And so then I'm chasing teenagers at that point, and so I missed some very, very important years. And because my children didn't have grandparents around them, that was another detrimental aspect to their lives, because there were things that my dad taught me that I wish he was around to teach them. And he just didn't get an opportunity to do that for a variety of reasons. And so, now I'm excited. My youngest son just had my newest grandson, and I'm super excited now, right? Because now I get a chance, and I'm telling him, hey man, hold this baby and love this baby as much as possible, because in about 2 years, he's not going to want to sit still long enough for you to hold him, right? He gets to running and walking, man, and there ain't going to be much holding at that point. And time goes by so fast. But that for me, and I'm hoping that somebody who's listening will be encouraged to know that, man, everybody doesn't start off with the ideal scene and the ideal situation. Children don't come with manuals. And if you don't have that support and you don't have that wisdom around you, man, you just going to do the best you can, with what you have. And so that was my early experience as a dad. And I look back, like I said, I became a dad, I was 22. And it really wasn't until I was in my late 30s that I felt like and said to myself, wow, man, I feel like I'm just ready to be a dad now, in my middle 30s, you know what I mean? I'm like, okay, but I've got these teenagers now that I have to now shift and raise. And so it's been an interesting journey.
I'm listening to you, and I'm wondering how many fathers that are out there listening can relate, because, the American apple pie kind of American dream approach is to, wait till you got, your degrees and your 2-car garage and white picket fence, and you got enough in your savings account and a little retirement. Then you start having, you start building a family, but it ain't like that for a lot of us. And I think what you just said is powerful in that, start where you are, give it your best. And the thing I was hearing as you were talking, Dr. Cofield, is, but God gives more grace. And,
absolutely, man.
And man, because my story is very similar to yours. He gives more grace, and his grace is sufficient, because some of us as dads, and the dads who are out there listening, we didn't know what the heck we was doing. We just did the best with what we were given. And as you heard from Dr. Cofield, and he didn't get to share this, but he's got amazing kids now who are doing amazing things, and hopefully he'll have a chance to share more about that in a moment. Dr. Cofield, if you would, just share, how did fatherhood intersect with ministry and your calling, and how did you manage that early on?
Yeah. Okay. So again, confession. I started off in ministry and bad counsel and bad discipleship.
Okay.
I really measured my worth, my self-worth out of my ministry, and did not fully understand, one, that my management of my home and my children was really the proving ground for my ministry.
Man, Dr. Cofield, can you say that one more time, please?
Yeah, that the home is, and how you manage your home is really the proving ground for how you manage ministry. If you can't manage your children, and if you can't love your wife like you should, listen, those tests are there to help prepare you for what you're going to face in ministry, what you're going to face in the church, what you're going to face when you're ministering to other family members. And so I was really on a bad track, and really spending time in the Word. And there was a family in Detroit, Michigan, that when I tell you that family blessed me in such a powerful way. They caught me at a very, very tough place in my life. And the Davis family, man, I love them to this day, man. I consider them family. They call me brother, and we've known each other now over 30 years. My mother used to tease me. She would say, you know, you go to their family reunion before you go to your own, right? But it was just a family by choice, and they modeled the love and family. And I heard them tell stories about their dad, who was a pastor, who passed away before I met them. And it caused me to go back home and to say, okay, I got to retool this. I got to reconfigure this. I didn't want to be, Eli, in Book of Samuel. I didn't want to be that father who was a pastor whose children were out there and they were doing what they were doing. Now, my children could go out there and do whatever they wanted to do, but I wanted, if they did that, it would be despite my efforts and despite my love, not in reaction to what they felt was a rejection from me because of time.
Yeah.
And that was the biggest shift that I had to make, Johnny. I just had to realize that, time is so precious, and you can't get time back, man. You can get money back. And if you ask me what I would do differently, I would spend way, way more time with my children when they were younger. I mean, I still got to get Pampers and still got to get milk and all those things. But, there were times that, for example, I was working 3 jobs and would send them on a vacation, but I didn't go.
Okay.
Because I had to work 2 of the 3 jobs. I couldn't get off, or whatever the case may be. Yeah. And I probably, now looking back, would have said, you know what? I'm not going to send you somewhere. We're just going to go to the pool together.
Yeah.
We're going to do some local things together. And because that time is really what people enjoy the most. There's a saying that, a man will come to the end of his life and regret many things, but he will never regret the time he spent with his children.
Come on.
And that for me has become a mantra that I try to live by now, in terms of making time. So even now when my daughter calls, she'll say, Dad, are you busy? And I'm always busy. I mean, I'm typically not just sitting around twiddling my thumbs, but my response is, I've got time for you. What do you need? And she's grown now, but me being her dad hasn't changed.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for being so transparent. Awesome. And, because a lot of times as pastors, we come up in this mold where we really cannot disclose a lot of our frailties, faults, and failures. We a lot of times are held to a standard to put up I don't want to call it the front, but certainly to convey to those whom we serve that we walk in it and that we've always had it together. And but thank you for being transparent. And I think there's some real nuggets from what you shared that fathers are listening to today. Captain Freeman, man, tell us about where you were when you began fatherhood, and how did that intersect with your calling to pursue a career in law enforcement?
Let me just say, Pastor Cofield, what powerful words you just echoed, and some of those will parallel into my life. Johnny, let me just say this. My grandfather, my mother's father, had told me a long time ago, you'll never truly know the meaning of love until you have your own children. You'll love your spouse a certain way, you'll love your parents a certain way, but until you have your own child, then and only then will you really know the true meaning and essence of love.
Yeah.
And Lord, it was true. I waited longer in life. I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. Their mother and I were married for about 15 years. We had a wonderful life together, but we just ran separate roads at the end of the day, and we would wind up divorcing. But from that marriage, we had 2 beautiful children. I was 35 years old. I'd already been on the department at that time for 14 years, maybe. so I was a sergeant, and Jared came along. That's my oldest son. He's 20 years old now, and my baby's 18. I didn't really have a father in life to model off of. My father was very abusive in life to my mother, and I don't mind sharing the story. He was a Vietnam veteran. He was an alcoholic. He came back from the war even more jacked up. I was about 4 or 5 years old and don't remember anything other than just getting beat and watching him beat my mother. And my mother's side of the family is all Italian, and it's a crazy culture that they have, but he's lucky to still be alive to this day from what he did. But I was glad at the end of the day that he left us. And we had a sporadic relationship for a couple of years after that, but at the end of the day, and I don't mind sharing this with your audience, I haven't talked to my father in almost 20 years.
Okay.
My boys have never seen him before. And he's tried to reach out a couple of times, but I don't know, at this stage in my life where I'm at right now, it's like, I don't need any more hurt. So, and I don't mind sharing that.
Yeah.
And I say this to my students a lot, that I learned a lot from that. And I say this as being a young police officer. I worked in inner city my whole career.
Yeah.
And I know what fatherless homes can do to a child. And it wasn't until later, as I learned academia and research, what that does statistically to a young kid growing up without that father. And I'm not taking anything away from mothers, because I was raised by a single mom. She did a wonderful job, but there's that element that's missing, having a strong dad in the home. And I saw that around me the whole career. I grew up in Acres Homes. I worked Acres Homes as a young officer on the street. I worked it for 8 years. And so I got to see the good and the bad, and what poverty does, and what just crime does, and gang peer influence, and just, it's a crazy thing. So it made me know even more so as a young police officer growing up, as a dad, when my children came into this world. Regardless of what happened with their mom and I, we were going to co-parent these children and make them into the best we could. And I did everything. And Pastor Cofield, in a way, I worked many jobs just like you, sir. Even as a policeman, we all kind of had second jobs. And dropping them off at dark 30 in the morning for daycare, picking them up late at night, having neighbors or family members picking up. And I mean, it's just doing everything you could to raise these kids to where they could become good. And their mom and I did a wonderful job. And she's a lieutenant on the police department still to this day. And I've since remarried. And my wife is a sergeant. So there was at one time a Captain Freeman, a Lieutenant Freeman, and a Sergeant Freeman. That's a whole nother story. Yeah. And so talk about learning how to navigate challenges, but it's all good. And life is very short, like what you said, Pastor Cofield. You can't take away those moments. I've spent every minute of my life with those boys. They are my life. I never saw them, Johnny, and I'll kind of change gears, as black or as white. They were my boys. I love them with my heart. I would die for them. But I was always cognizant of their ethnicity. And I mean, I know this will come in at a later question, but they were my kids. And I will say this on a personal note, there are family members to this day in my family that I haven't spoken to since those children were born. Isn't that sad? It's just, racism is such an insidious evil that exists, and it crosses over many boundaries. And at the end of the day, it's like, if you can't bring me love into my family, I have nothing for you. It's a sad state of affairs, but it is what it is. And, you know, if you love somebody, then who you marry should not matter.
I appreciate Cap for sharing his story. You know, my father was abusive as well, and even abusive of my mother when he was in ministry. You know, and our relationship basically ended when I was in college, and I stood up to him and told him that he wasn't going to do it anymore. And at that point, I think I can count on one hand the times that we've talked after that. And I went for about 10 or 15 years and hadn't heard from him. I actually reached out to him because one of the things God taught me was that forgiveness was a gift that I had to give to myself. And as I look back, I saw the root and the causes of his pain, of his anger.
Yeah.
Because I recognize anger at that point. You know, I'm walking in more enlightenment, and I recognize that his anger was really a secondary emotion. And so I was able to go back and see the hurt that he went through. Yeah. You know, and there's an adage that hurt people hurt people.
That's right.
And so as I was able to go back, I could see and I can understand. Still don't agree with what he did, but I understand what he did, and I understand the anger and the frustration. And I reached out to him on several occasions because I just wanted to tell him two things. One, I understand, And secondly, I still love him, because at the end of the day, he's still my dad, right?
Oh.
And what I wanted him to know was that I understood that she was his woman before he was my father, right? And so there's some things, I always tell my children, because their mother and I have divorced. I've since remarried. But, I always told them, she was my woman before she became your mama.
Right.
And there's some grown folk business that you're never going to understand. I don't care how old you get, that went on between your mother and I, but that will not change the fact that I will always be your father.
Yeah.
And there's no getting around that. And again, that's those less than ideal situations. I'm not boasting about that. And I'm certainly not saying that somebody wants to go down that road, but I am testifying to what you said earlier, where sin abounds, grace abounds even more. And so I've just been tremendously humbled, man, by the grace of God. And I'm visiting my youngest son now, who just had my newest grandson. So I'm visiting him, and I'm gonna spend Father's Day with him, his first Father's Day. And as I was holding my grandson, I told my son, I said, the dysfunction that I am knowledgeable of in our family will stop with you.
Come on.
And I'm here to do that, because, when we talk about generational curses, what we don't realize is that those are not things that are pronounced upon us. Those are practices that we carry from one generation to the next. We don't say enough is enough. And so, I've said to him, hey, man, this goes no further. I can go back and track the dysfunction in my family all the way back to my great grandfather, who was the product of slave rape. I mean, and I can see the pain and the abuse that has been leveled at every generation. And I'm telling him, man, we're not going any further. This is it. And, you have my support as long as I live. My grandson has my support. All of my grandchildren have my support. And we're going to stop the dysfunction now.
My mother's greatest fear in life, when I told her that my ex-wife was pregnant with our first child, her greatest fear was that I was going to become like my father. I was going to become that person to my children that he was to us. And I was offended almost when she said that. And it's like, if it gave me any motivation and love in life, was to be anything but that to those boys. Mm-hmm. And I tell this to my students all the time. And like what you said, Pastor Cofield, you broke the cycle. And I was a product of a domestic violence environment 10 times over. And I know what that pain felt like. And there was no way on God's green earth that I was going to allow my children to feel the same thing that I felt. And that's why I showered them with love from day one. And my father, his father was a World War II veteran, my grandfather, and my mother would always tell me, she said, son, I don't think your grandfather ever told, I never heard him, meaning my mother, tell him that he loved him.
Wow.
At one time in life. I always say that 4-letter word, it's a powerful thing, man. And Pastor Cofield, we all know this. Telling that baby that you love them and giving them assurances and hope and love that you're going to be there for them, it's enduring. And every time my children and I talk, I'm just one of those dads that when I end the phone call before it's over with, Dad loves you. Okay, I love you too, Dad. And that's it. And I know going forward, they're going to carry on this legacy of love, and that cycle has been broken. And I say that to all the fathers that are out there listening right now. It's never too late to break that cycle.
Well, the gospel is being preached in our hearing right now. And as DZ said, where sin abounds, grace abounds. And I think it's impossible to talk about Father's Day without talking about father wounds. Right. And so to all of us, mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, I mean, we could spend an entire episode just talking about father wounds. But I'm hearing an emerging theme that's blessing me right now. And that is that God gives grace. That is that generational curses are being broken by those of us who have walked in forgiveness, those of us who have embraced forgiveness, number one, of ourselves as fathers for mistakes that we've made. Because I brought you on for y'all to talk. I didn't bring you on for me to talk. But my story is aligned with you all's in that I didn't have it together when I became a father. I needed much forgiveness, and there were generational curses that had to be broken. I'm Johnny Douglas Gentry III. My daddy is Johnny D. Gentry Jr. DZ, you may know of my dad from your time with the NAACP. He was secretary or treasurer for NAACP for a long time. And my daddy, he won't mind me saying this because he testified he was a cheater, he was abusive. Mama left him, and I grew up in California with a stepdad who was an alcoholic and an abuser. And so I learned that it was okay to be high and drunk and still function, because he was a functioning, addict, alcoholic. And I brought those things into young adulthood and had to break curses. My biological father was also divorced 4 times. Wow. And he's divorced today. And Cap, as you said, when your mama said her greatest fear was, I don't want you to be like your dad, that was my motivation. That whenever we'd act up growing up, my mama would say, you're acting like Johnny Gentry. And my thoughts were, I am Johnny Gentry. That's right. My father. And to mothers whom I love, single moms who moved on, remarried, I think that it goes well to say that let's, as much as possible, speak blessings over the biological fathers of our children. I know there's history. I know that there is some toxic relationship, but it did a negative service to me as a child to hear repeatedly the venom that my mother had towards my father. And it wasn't until I moved to Houston in 1995 at 24 years old, got to know my father. And DZ, like you said, it's some grown folk stuff that I found out that is 3 sides to every story. Right. Her side, his side, and the truth, right? So our fathers, and when Mother's Day is there, mamas, y'all get to say what y'all want to say, but today's Father's Day, we're going to say what we want to say today. Fathers, we do the best that we know to do with what we have. And that's how we're able to look back and say, you know what, in spite of my father's flaws, in spite of his mistakes, that was the best he knew to do. I choose to forgive. I choose to love. I choose to move on. And today, my father and I have an amazing relationship. Man, he speaks into my life. He's my road dog. He's 85 years old, and I love him to life. We're almost out of time, but I had several more questions. But listen, I gotta get you guys to speak into this right here, because again, the theme today is it's Father's Day special is justice from the voice of fathers. Justice from the voice of fathers. DZ, if you would just share, what issues have you had with racism and racial injustice while you were raising your children, and how did racism in this country influence your parenting?
So I think, Johnny, before we do that, I want to say this to Cap, and Cap, I want to encourage you to take that call from your father. I want to encourage you, not necessarily to bring him into the family, but to take that call, because it just may be the vehicle for his healing, along with your healing. Because just like we all did the best that we could, I'm sure he would look back and see the mistakes that he made, and he probably did the best that he could out of his unresolved hurt and pain. I look at my dad and the abusive environment that he grew up in. I look at the abandonment issues that he had, not knowing his own father. And man, I felt bad for my dad. I really, and I never got a chance to tell him that. Yeah. I never got a chance to speak life into him, just like he gave life to me. Yeah. And I missed that opportunity. He passed away. I didn't even know he passed. My youngest son was doing a genealogy project and just mentioned that he had passed. And I was like, wait a minute, what'd you say? And my youngest son was like, "Oh, Dad, I thought you knew and you just didn't tell us. I didn't even know he had passed." And it was like, oh man. And I never got a chance to tell him that, you know, I just wanted to speak healing into his life, because he just never found it. He never found that peace. And I'm not sure that he didn't die without that peace. I really think he didn't. And so I just want to say that, Johnny, in terms of the justice issue, you know, I've given my children the talk, you know, that all Black fathers, you know, that all fathers have. If you have multiracial children, if you have children who are not white and they have to interact with the police, man, I've given them the talk. Yeah. My two oldest have had a lot of negative interactions with police. My son, my oldest son, brought some of that negative reaction on himself. You know, he was hustling, you know, was shot 4 times in the incident. I mean, you know, he was out there. And I'm grateful to God, man, that he's still alive, and that he's had a change take place in him, and is still taking place in him. My daughter, very close to George Floyd and his family, and, you know, had an incident just recently, you know, and I've always told my children, you know, to make sure that you are in the right. If you're in the right, man, I'm gonna go to the mat for you. I'm gonna lay down my life for you. But don't let me get out here and start clowning somebody and you were wrong.
That's right.
And, you know, she was driving back from North Carolina, where the family funeral was, because one of the sisters doesn't fly. And so they were driving, they drove out for the funeral, were driving back, and they were forced off the road by a white SUV that had some white men in it, who jumped out of the car and shouted nigger and all kinds of racial epithets at them. And, you know, if you know my daughter's a big girl, in stature and height and everything. And if you know my daughter, and I always told her from being a child that she should have been an attorney, because she is always going to talk, always going to run her mouth, even when she shouldn't. And she called me and she was in shock at what happened. And so I'm asking her the questions that, you know, my training would look to answer, you know, like, hey, did you get a license plate? What kind of vehicle? How tall was the guy? How many of them was it? And she wasn't calling me to give me a description. She was calling me as a daughter who needed to talk to her dad because she was petrified.
Wow.
And so as we talked through it, and she started crying, and she just said, Daddy, we wasn't doing anything. Like, I didn't even ask her what they were doing. She just said, Daddy, we wasn't doing anything. We were just driving down the road.
Wow.
The other thing that disturbed me was it happened, she told me, outside of Jennings, Louisiana, somewhere out there. And they called 911. And not only did the police officers not come, but there was not even a follow-up as you would normally get if you make a 911 call and, you know, you hang up the phone, somebody's going to call you back. And so nothing was done about it. And she told me she didn't want any fuss. The family didn't want any fuss because they didn't want it to overshadow the upcoming funeral for George. They didn't want to add, you know, fuel to the fire. And so I just kind of let it go. But it was hard for me as a dad to sit back and to not defend my child and to fight for my child. I think one of the things that I've always asked police officers to do is just admit that they're human beings.
Yeah.
You know, when you talk to officers, when you talk to district attorneys, and they act like issues of bias, whether it's implicit or explicit or a figment of people's imaginations, or that when you ride up, you are prejudiced and that you prejudge people, and they act like that doesn't happen. Now you're insulting my intelligence.
Yeah.
You know, because it does happen, because you're a human being. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
The fact is that you're going to make a mistake. We know that. Yeah. But the difference is when you make a mistake with a gun and you're trained to shoot, you're probably going to take somebody's life. You know, the issue of good cops. And I know that the percentages, man, There's so many great police officers. I mean, I'm the son of a police officer, but I've changed my tune on this, and I'd love to talk to Captain about this on another call. I've changed my tune because I'm not giving good cops a pass anymore. I'm of the mindset, if you're a good cop and you know they're bad cops, and I haven't talked to a good cop who doesn't know the bad cops who are on their job, who go too far, who shouldn't be police officers, then, damn it, excuse my vernacular, then you need to report it, and there needs to be a system in place, because even the good cops should want the bad cops off the street, because it makes their job that much harder. Yeah. And so I've just been, helping children. I just think, though, we're in a bad place, man. We're in a bad place. I shouldn't have to teach my children how to interact with a grown person who is trained to do their job. I want them to have respect, but I teach my children to do that with everybody. Yeah. Even in their 30s, if they're talking to somebody, I'm going to correct them and say, hey, you say yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, because I do it, and I do it with people who are younger than me, because that's what I was taught to do.
Yeah, yeah. That's for you. You said so many powerful things, and I think what you said, DZ, is where the sentiment of the Black community is, Captain, and that is that, Cap, you'll close us out with just sharing kind of about your experiences with racial injustice and where you are. But I think where the Black community is that you don't get a pat on the back of being a good cop. And we expect you to operate in training. We expect you to operate in professionalism. And then I think leaders who hold law enforcement accountable, even within the department and outside the department, are really, I think, tired of the blue code, if you will. And so, Cap, can you just speak to racism, brutality, what you saw? Our time is almost up. I'm gonna have Pastor DZ close us out with prayer. Okay. But just speak to it. What have you seen? I know you had your own philosophy for how you dealt with it in Northeast, and then where do we go from here?
Let me just say this, and I'll start off with this. Johnny, Pastor, we have 800,000 men and women that wear the uniform honorably every day, valorous acts of heroism, saving lives, protecting people in the communities that need them the most. And I can't tell you the pain that I have felt when I saw the video. I'm just going to say this right now. I think every policeman that I know, it's hard to fathom and even put in words how I felt when I saw what happened to Mr. Floyd. And Pastor, like you, I didn't know how to react because I thought of my two boys, and we had a long conversation, both of my children did. And it's a painful thing, man, it is. And it goes against everything that I've stood for. He's the Benedict Arnold of law enforcement, I guess. He's a traitor. All the work that we have done collectively, and this includes you and I, Johnny, in the community, it just took it back another generation almost, in my opinion. Is there a culture that's deep within law enforcement? Yes, there is. Where police officers, and what you said, Pastor, is very true. They know who the bad guys are. But I put this on management as well, because what we're seeing happening is, and I'm going to say this about the incident or the death of Mr. Floyd, when they start peeling back this investigation, you're going to find out that Derek Chauvin just didn't wake up that morning and decide to abuse people. He's been doing that his whole career. And he had supervisors in that department that just kicked the can down the road and didn't do anything about it. And it was this, and we see this happening in other police departments. I saw it within my agency. As I promoted up through the ranks and I assumed command of a division, and I've got 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 problem children, white, black, Hispanic, and I'm thinking, why is this person allowed to continue keep doing this and no one's called them into the office? Because their supervisors didn't do anything about it. And it's this negligence, this type of culture that needs to stop. And I agree with you. But in terms of the racism that we have seen, and I'm speaking from Greg Freeman's perspective. Yeah. And I look at Houston Police Department as a microcosm of the larger picture. We have a wonderful police department, Johnny. We're the most diversified big city police department in the United States. 52% of our personnel are minority. Biggest city in the United States, the 4th largest, most diverse. With that being said, we've had a history in our department for the most part, that other cities really haven't had. When other cities were burning, we really didn't have those issues. Have we had problems and controversial shootings in the city? Yes, and unjustified shootings. Yes, we have. Did racism and does racism exist within our department? You damn well it does. I'll be the first one to tell you that. Ever since the George Floyd video came out, I think I probably defriended about 5 or 6 retired officers.
Okay.
Because they're not condoning what they saw, but they wouldn't condemn it until the rest of the investigation came out or the toxicology reports. I don't need to hear any of that bullshit. Excuse my French. I saw what I saw in that video was enough for me. And I believe in due process, but there are some things on those rare occasions, I don't need to see anything else. And if we can't come together and condemn what this man did, then you're a part of the problem. And that's what I told him. And so we do have those elements that are out there, not just retired officers, but active duty officers as well. Does it exist? Yes, it does. And you're right, Pastor Cofield, we need to have a systemic change in the way that we police ourselves. And we do. And it's a long-standing culture, you know, don't snitch on your fellow officer, the blue line and this and that. I would like to say from my perspective, especially my last 7 or 8 years, that we started seeing more of a resurgence of officers that were reporting this. Of all the internal affairs division complaints that are filed on Houston police officers, 72% last time I checked were internal. So they're filing on each other now, reporting misconduct, you know, sexual harassment, racial discrimination, excessive force. So these complaints are coming up more in our agency. I don't know if that's reflective of other cities. So it's a lot of work to do. I don't think it's something that we can't do, but I'm going to point to y'all when I say this, and Pastor, y'all have been doing this. It's going to take the spiritual leaders of this community and other communities to join forces with policing. We can't do it by ourselves. You can't do it by yourself. This police community dichotomy has to be strong together. Yeah. And I'll use this as an example. It wasn't the shooting death of Michael Brown that spurred all of this rioting. Ferguson, that was just the spark that lit the embers that had been flaming for years in that little city. Yeah. There was a disconnect between the police and the community. And you see this disconnect in a lot of these other cities that are burning right now. They don't have that cohesive partnership. And like what we did at Northeast, and that's how I met you. First thing I did, that station had problematic issues for 40 years. I needed y'all's help. And I transferred a lot of people out of that station. We fired several people that were terminated. We had lieutenants being transferred, but I had to do a complete supervisory overview and facelift for that station. We started off fresh, and I extended the olive branch to the community, as you know. And I needed y'all's help in the community. And from that, when other cities were burning during Ferguson and Baltimore, Detroit, we kept the peace here in Houston, and we did. And it had a lot to do with the way that we do community policing in the city, which really started with Lee P. Brown in 1981.
Thank you so much for bringing the community together under your leadership. You brought pastors together when pastors couldn't get pastors together in Northeast.
Yeah, so one of the passages that's encouraged me recently is 1 Timothy 5:8. Yeah. And the idea of a person providing for their household, and if they do not, they're worse than an unbeliever. Mm-hmm. And when you look at that word provide, we typically really narrowly define provision around material provisions and the things that are necessary for life and living. Yeah. And that word provision says nothing about or is not limited to the physical. Mm-hmm. It really talks about just making sure you are prepared beforehand. Mm-hmm. And so as I began to think about it, I thought about my own life, that I need to provide for my family the leadership in every aspect of life and living, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. Yeah. You know, when I forgave my father and talked to my children about it, I provided for them a model of forgiveness.
Provision.
I provided for and took care of my mother. You know, my youngest son was interceding on behalf of a family member. And I said, man, why are you doing that? And he said, Dad, that's all I know. That's what you've shown us. Right. And so our challenge and my challenge to fathers is to make sure you recognize that just like you grow in love, you grow into being a father. that none of us have arrived. We're all males by birth. We become men by choice, and we become better fathers by choice. And I want to leave everybody with that thought.
Man, that's powerful.
Let's pray. Father, thank you for today. Man, I thank you for Johnny Gentry III. I thank you for my brother. I thank you for his heart and for his commitment to you. I thank you for Captain Freeman and the decision that he made years ago to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. And I just pray now, God, that this discussion will be a blessing to somebody through the power of social media and technology. Thousands of people who will see this that we don't know by name, that we can't call or contact personally, but they will be blessed by the words that have been shared. And I pray, God, that we would look in the mirror and see not just where we are, but also where we need to go, and that we would continue the journey to becoming all you desire us to be. I thank you, God, for our time, and where my prayers fall short, make up the difference. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Well, I hope this segment of this Father's Day special entitled Justice from the Voices of Fathers has blessed you. Heartfelt dialogue and discussion, some emotional moments, some powerful moments. I pray that fathers around the world are uplifted, are encouraged, are just edified and built up. And it is my prayer that as we're in these last days, in these tumultuous times, that we sense God turning the hearts of the fathers back to the children, and God turning the hearts of children back to the fathers. May our families be whole. May our communities be restored. And may fathers rise up in this hour and take their place as the husbands, the house bands, the band around the house, around community, around our nation, around our culture. Listen, Black fathers matter. All fathers matter. This Father's Day, I wish you God's best. Until next time, we'll see you soon. Live free.